Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this month's Cyber Showcase, which will be a conversation about employee access review. Really looking forward to it. I think we've got some really good information to share, and we're going to be able to jump into kind of some wireframes and some walkthrough of our one of our newest or our newest module that will be coming out here in the near future. So very excited to do both of those things with you, and I've got some great people on here with me to help out. I will start just quickly. My name's Brett Rock. I'm your host as always, business development product specialist here at SBS. Looking forward to walking through this with you. And as I mentioned, I've got two other people with me. The first of which is our director of product, Tony Meyer. This is her fourth appearance on the Cyber Showcase. So just another highlight in a long and distinguished career. I think she's got the top spot in the number of appearances here. But Tony, I'll give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thanks for welcoming me back again, Brett. I'm Tony Meyer. I'm the Director of Product for SBS Cybersecurity. I've been with the company about 2.5 years, and I lead our product strategy, primarily revolving around our TRAC product. So I focus on building out the roadmap and working with our development team to build the new features and functionalities that we have coming out.
Awesome. Thank you again for being here. And then a first-time guest, and certainly won't be the last, I hope. Terry Cuxhouse is one of our senior information security consultants, is actually a team lead on that side of the house as well. Terry, I'll give you a minute here if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Been with SBS now for coming up on 7 years, and team lead, senior information security consultant. So I work with a lot of clients, and one of the things we do as a consultant is help with user access reviews. So I'll share with you guys as we go through this some of the things I've seen out there. So thanks for letting me join, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you. And Terry's got a background, obviously, in financial institutions. So for a lot of the people on the webinar today, he's been in your shoes and I think has some really good information to share. So I'm really excited about having both Tony and Terry here with me today. So with that said, a couple of real quick housekeeping items as always. If you have any questions, please go ahead and use the question and answer box that's provided. If you want to use the chat, that's fine. We'll try to get to those at the end as well. Tony is going to monitor that for me. Really appreciate that. And then if you would be as kind as to take our quick survey at the end, it'll pop right up when you sign off. It just helps us get better and make sure we're getting you the information you need. So would appreciate if you take a minute to fill that out for me.
Real quick.
All right, so let's jump into things. On the agenda side, first of all, there's some flattering photos of the three of us, as well as our contact information. Hopefully I'm speaking for Tony and Terry when I say if you need to reach out to any of the three of us, we'd be happy to help as much as we can. From an agenda perspective, we're going through introductions and agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about some really exciting things that you probably heard about already, the two new modules that we've released in the past couple of months here. I just want to highlight those again. We're going to talk about some of the upcoming webinars we've got as a team. And then Terry and I are going to jump into a security through access review portion of the program here, talk a little bit about the ins and outs, why it's important, what to do, what not to do, some of those things. And then, as I mentioned, Tony's going to give you an introduction to why we've decided to go forward with an employee access module, what's driving that, where we are, how far along we are, things like that. And then we'll walk through some of the wireframes. We'll have takeaways, and then if time permits, we'll have some Q&A. If you do put any questions in there, I promise we'll get back to you, whether it's during the webinar or afterward. But with that said, let's jump into, just quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with SBS, although I'm not sure how many of those could possibly be on this webinar, we have been in the industry for over 20 years now. We have all kinds of great credentials, great reasons why our customers trust us. But we are there at the bottom, one of my favorite things, ranked #1 for cybersecurity consulting. So a feather in Terry and his team's cap, certainly. What's here from SBS? If you are anything like me, you're probably getting tired of hearing about NIST and CRI, but we are right around the corner of August 31st. It'll be here before we know it. And for those of you who are familiar with that date in terms of its significance here, that is the sunset of the CAT. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the new framework completed by then, but we do anticipate you getting some questions from examiners about where you are going, what one you're going to go with, what framework you've chosen, and where you are in the process. So as you're making that decision, just a reminder, we do have a NIST CSF risk assessment module that is available. We have both a free and premium version of that. And then we do also have a CRI profile module as well. NIST has been out, I think, Tony, for probably close to 2 months now. CRI is probably coming up on a month, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we released NIST in February of this year and CRI in May. So it's been
so a little bit longer than that even. I've been talking about it longer than I thought. So would love to talk to you about those. Again, if you haven't looked at either of them, haven't sat in on any of the webinars we've done, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation about that. Just some of the webinars we've got coming up. I know you're all probably familiar with the different things we do, but Cody Delzer, our principal consultant, later this month will be covering why data flow diagrams can change your life. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm sure Cody's got it down. He's going to talk about data flow diagram basics and use cases, where to start, what the next steps are, how to tie it into other areas of your ISP. That's coming on August 13th. Encourage you to take a look at that. We've got our monthly hacker hour coming out on August 28th. That's where Nick Podrodsky is going to be joined by one of our partners to talk about the CEO's glossary for cybersecurity. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And then we do have another Institute webinar coming in September, Incident Response Fundamentals, the 2025 edition, where Dylan Pretzfeld is going to cover current cybersecurity landscape, IRP basics and cybersecurity regulatory guidance, identification and assessments, all kinds of great stuff there as well. So certainly encourage you to tune into that as well. And then I don't have a slide for this one, but I do want to give Tony a minute here to talk. I'm sure some of you are a part of this, and if not, we encourage you, if you're a TRAC user, to get involved. We do have a TRAC user group that we meet, I think, twice a year, but I'll let Tony cover that. We've got one coming up pretty soon here as well.
Yeah, we do. We have our next one coming up on September 17th. Starts around 9:30 in the morning Central Time. We go till about 1:30 in the afternoon. You can kind of come and go as you need to with your other responsibilities, but it's a great opportunity to learn more about kind of the fundamentals of TRAC, as well as what's coming out in our future releases. So myself and Zach Bierman talk a little bit about what's been on the roadmap for TRAC and what's coming up. And we'll have different guest speakers and panelists. We invite a few of our customers to join in as well. So it's a great opportunity to collaborate with other TRAC users and learn a little bit of tips and tricks on different things that you can do with the various TRAC modules. So would love for you guys to join us. Again, it's on September 17th, starts at 9:30 in the morning. You can register right on our website.
Great. Well, thank you for covering that. And apologize I didn't get a slide in here in time, but that is very exciting. And I will also be involved in that and look forward to engaging in some good conversation with our customers and with some of our teammates there. So great group to be a part of, especially if you're a TRAC user and want to get to know it better. So I encourage you to join there. All right. So with that said, let's jump into the subject of today's conversation. So employee access reviews. Obviously, probably not the most fun thing in the world. I don't know how many people grow up saying, I can't wait to do employee access reviews someday, but it is a critical component of the information and cybersecurity program. And we've got about as good as anybody on the call here, on the webinar here, to talk about that with Terry. So I want to start here with kind of what they are. And this is just a quick definition. Employee access reviews, formal process where organizations, institutions periodically examine and verify kind of the big things: who has access to what systems, data, and applications, and just whether or not that's still appropriate based on their role, or whether or not they're still here necessarily. So I know that's kind of a broad definition. So I thought maybe I'd start, Terry, by just turning it over to you. How would you define employee access reviews in kind of the simplest terms?
Well, from my perspective, it's basically validating who has access to what information. Generally, you try to make sure that you limit that access to what those people need for their job responsibilities. And, least privilege, we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, or zero trust is another buzzword that you hear quite often. It's all about limiting access to data. Obviously, that introduces risk the more access people have to more data.
So you've obviously sat in the seat before, as I mentioned, and I would encourage you to highlight some of that part of your background as well before you came to SBS. But when you were in that role and kind of having to go through these, was there anything in particular that you found to be most important about doing them? Maybe something that was maybe really frustrating about doing them? Anything that stands out from your time having done this in a previous life?
So I did work in community banking for about 14 years prior to coming here to SBS. doing IT and information security work. And while doing so, we did develop a user access review process that we formulated a program and worked with our internal team and our audit department to formalize that process. And, it was not an easy process. I'll say that. It took a lot of work, and it does take a lot of time. So having a process is very important, especially if it's an automation. If there's any automation at all in your process, that helps a lot. We'll talk about some of the tools here in a little bit, of which TRAC is one of the tools. But it's all about, like I said, limiting access, reduces our risk. And you think about it, so why is that important, right? So if a user has access to a lot of information that they shouldn't or don't need to have access to, if their account, their credentials gets compromised, or even their device gets compromised, you've just introduced a very easy way for a bad actor to get access to a whole bunch of data that they really didn't need access or shouldn't have access to. So that's kind of the justification of why we need to do this. Obviously, regulators understand the risk. Auditors are looking at this very carefully as well. And I've seen an uptick in that. They are being more closely reviewed and scrutinized on how these user access reviews are being performed, how often they're being performed, to what level they're being performed, and how they're being reported on.
So I guess I'm going to put forth this statement. I'm going to allow you to tell me if I'm completely wrong on it. It seems to me like employee access reviews can be pretty frustrating, time consuming. Totally get that. There's, certainly other pieces of the information security program that those labels also get attached to sometimes, but employee access review in particular just seems kind of like low hanging fruit for building better security culture and kind of improving the posture of the organization overall. If we're doing this, we're doing it consistently, we're doing it well, it does seem like a relatively easy way to improve pretty quickly in some areas. Is that fair to say?
Well, kind of. I mean, low-hanging fruit to me means very simple, cheap, and easy to do. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, developing a process and a program, if you will, to conduct and manage the user access reviews is not necessarily easy. Sure. Once you get it formalized and get it built and have a repeatable process in place, it gets to be easier, but it's a time-consuming process. Mm-hmm. And you have to have buy-in from other stakeholders in the organization, because the person doing the user access reviews isn't necessarily going to have all the answers. They're going to require other individuals that maybe administer other applications to provide insight. Okay, give us an export or a report of all the users from this application, what level of access they have, if that's available. Otherwise, you're going to have the participation of those other administrators or privileged access users participate in the user access review to provide that level of access that their team has.
Sure. That's a great point. And maybe I can rephrase. Maybe I have a better way of articulating what I'm getting at. So it's basically, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're the expert. It's just trying to figure out who has access to what, right? And making sure they have the right access, making sure that we're disabling access if people leave, and making sure that we're taking care of that. So just in the sense of, we're not necessarily having to bring on a ton of new technology, a ton of new controls, but as we know, people are kind of the weakest link at all times. So making sure that they only have access to the things they need probably does benefit, or it's kind of an easy way to back into a more secure culture. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think another good point to make at this point is more and more organizations are moving to cloud-based applications. Sure. And you mentioned when employees leave, so that's something that introduces a lot of risk. If you don't know what an employee has access to and they leave your organization, and that access is tied to a cloud-based application, do they still have access once they've left your organization? And how much risk does that introduce to that application? So knowing what users have access to is extremely important as we move forward into more and more cloud-based applications.
So before we do move on to kind of just talking about why they're important and some of the details around that, what's kind of the biggest roadblock you see sometimes when you talk to organizations, or even again in your past as you've been doing these at a community bank? What's kind of the biggest roadblock that you run into in making sure that these are done well and consistently?
Well, I would say what I've seen out there, not only from banking experience, but also consulting experiences, is defining the responsibility. Who's going to champion this process? Who's going to make sure that it's being done and drive everybody to participate? And getting everybody's buy-in has also been a challenge, because some people just say, well, I don't have time for this. This isn't my role. But everybody needs to take part. If they're managing access to any application, they need to take part in the user access review.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about just why they are important. And you hit on a lot of these already, but making sure you ensure employees have the right level of access. We're detecting unauthorized, excessive, or outdated permissions, and it's just a good way to maintain security compliance and operational efficiencies. Obviously, I've listed some common reasons on the slide here. I would encourage you. Are there any here that stand out in terms of most critical? Anything that you're missing here that you would want to add to this slide, Terry, if you could?
Well, it all comes down to risk, right? I mean, if you have too much access, you're more apt to have a data breach. If more information is at risk, and like I mentioned, that device or user gets compromised, it makes the data breach that much worse. So limiting the impact of any type of a compromise to limit the impact or size of the breach.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can imagine, we run into this with some of the other things that we have tools to assist with in TRAC, the risk assessments, vendor management, stuff like that. This probably seems like something that can come across as kind of a check the box activity to a lot of people that probably don't get as deep in the weeds in it. How would you, or how have you explained to people that probably don't think these matter as much? How do you kind of persuade them to get that buy-in and say, hey, we need to be doing this? Because to your point, if there is some sort of access that gets from whether a stolen device or a phishing attempt or something like that, not having this locked down can be pretty devastating, obviously. Is there anything you've had success with in terms of securing that buy-in from people that might not be initially as excited about it?
Well, I mean, you can sure share like some statistics on the cost of a breach, the number of users that get affected by that. And the other thing is, think about is, it only takes one account to get compromised. If that one account has elevated privileges or access to information that they shouldn't have access to, it just takes that one account to get compromised. So,
sure. So who do you typically see at an institution owning this process? Is there a role that's typical, or is it just anybody who gets excited about it? Kind of, what do you see in the industry in terms of the person that would typically own this whole process?
well, it kind of depends on the organization, the size of the organization, the structure. A lot of the clients I work with, it falls mainly on the information security officer and potentially the audit or compliance team. That's generally who I see driving the program and managing it and reporting on it. I've worked with several information security officers to build out a program. I'm very excited for the TRAC module because it's going to make that process much easier. It's been a manual process so far, and it's time consuming. It gets to be a challenge. Spreadsheet based is quite often what we use to keep track of all of these. So I'm very excited for the automation and more efficiencies within TRAC, that module in TRAC. So that will help. And then one more thing on the last topic there about, it only takes one account, yes. But as I mentioned, there are various standouts in the last year that we've heard of where their breaches have occurred. And part of that breach was associated with elevated permissions or access to information that wasn't necessarily needed. You talk about one of those last summer, 16 billion passwords were compromised that led to additional compromises of various cloud apps because those cloud apps weren't properly secured and those usernames and passwords were compromised. So, that's just one example. There's many out there that, the importance of user access review and limiting access is a very important aspect. And I mentioned it earlier, the regulators and auditors are more and more apt to be verifying and monitoring how we're doing these.
So you touched on this as well about more and more going, more and more stuff going to the cloud and kind of representing some additional issues. Obviously, one of those areas is M365. And I know that we do hardening assessments and kind of we generally come back with a number of findings just because that's built to be more collaborative and have, people have more access to things. Are you starting to see, or I guess, is it your sense that having those types of things that are built to have more collaboration, that it just continues to, or maybe even by default, they have some settings that might cause problems?
Well, yeah, I mean, as we rely more on these cloud applications, and a lot of times what I'll do as part of a user access review is an authentication review. How are you authenticating to these apps, and how are you securing that authentication? Do you have multi-factor authentication, a secure, strong multi-factor authentication, maybe IP restrictions, or are you moving towards a single sign-on platform? A lot of times we'll incorporate that review. I mean, if you're a TRAC user or if you're doing IT risk assessments, that should be included in your IT risk assessments. But it's always a good thing just to verify as you're doing your user access reviews, is to validate that. Do we really have proper authentication, especially for your cloud apps? That's where it's really, really important. And verify you have confirmed your authentication is what it should be. And some vendors don't honestly provide the controls that they should for some of those cloud apps. And that's frustrating for me from a security standpoint. We work with clients all the time, and they're like, well, we can't incorporate MFA because the vendor doesn't offer it. I'm like, well, you got to realize how much risk that's exposing the organization to, because this is a cloud application and you've got a lot of confidential information at risk. So just make sure we keep an eye on the authentication process as well as part of our user access reviews.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to touch on. I'm going to give you some space I'm going to clear out and let you cover this because I know you mentioned it in the lead up to this. What do you consider, what needs to be considered as part of an employee access review from a asset perspective? How would one determine these are the things we want to have included as part of that?
Well, yeah, I kind of touched on the IT risk assessment earlier, but really what it comes down to, just plain and simple, is any application or any device that stores, processes, or transmits PII should be included in a user access review and an IT risk assessment. So anything that stores, processes, or transmits confidential information.
Great. So why are those things so important? We talk about things like preventing insider threats and privilege creep, and I do want to come back to that. Reduce the risk of data breaches and regulatory violations, improve visibility, and frankly, it's good security hygiene at the end of the day. I've heard the term privilege creep thrown around. I'll be completely transparent. I'm not totally up to date on what that means. Could you give us an idea of what privilege creep means and how it can impact institutions or organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the most common methods of privilege creep is a user with an organization. Maybe they start at an entry-level position or one aspect of a position, and they get promoted, or they change type of positions within the organization. And maybe they're doing dual roles for a period of time, but then they're given access to additional information as they take on more responsibilities or their job roles change. Well, then it never goes back and the previous permissions never get removed. So they're continually gaining and creeping their permissions from one role to the next. That's what I normally see quite often when you talk about privilege creep.
So what type of, obviously it seems pretty obvious, or I hope I'm not missing anything, but the danger that represents is similar to what you've talked about quite a bit already, which is just having more access than they should. And maybe people aren't aware of it, can lead to obviously some significant consequences, right?
Absolutely. And the other aspect is the employee side of it. Hopefully we're training our employees and educating our employees to make sure that they know what they should and shouldn't be doing from safe computer practices and that type of thing. But if we can limit access to the data and control the authentication, that's extremely important.
So obviously insider threats are probably something that keeps people up at night. I guess a couple of questions, maybe a two-part question I'd ask you here is, how significant do you see insider threats just in general? And is it more likely that they're not necessarily an insider threat themselves, but just by virtue of having potentially more access than they need to, they're kind of a threat without knowing it? Is that really where that comes into play, a little bit more than just like somebody at the institution is going to try to break in and steal something? I guess, does that make sense from a question perspective?
Yeah, it does. And privilege creep, it does become even more important when you're talking about an insider bad actor. I was reading some statistics here just in the last couple of weeks. Of all the breaches in the last year, 34% of those breaches were caused by insider activity. So it is a significant piece of the breaches that occur. Not saying all of those were intentional breaches. Right. Some of those were just, the user was careless or didn't really understand what they were doing. But that's a significant impact, or a significant number. 34% of all breaches were insiders.
Yeah. So
one other stat on too. Please. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
The importance of managing the credentials, as I mentioned, in credential theft. And if a user's credentials get stolen and they've got access to all the information, that's the risk, right? Mm-hmm. Credential theft in the last year has been up 30% as well. So that just is another reinforcing factor in the importance of managing who has access to what.
Absolutely. So I've got some things I'm just going to put on the screen that I think kind of at least lead to an idea of how to do this well, following a regular cadence. We can talk about why that's important. The use of the principle of least privilege, you talked about that. I know we want to get into that a bit. Reviewing all access types. It does seem like it has to be a pretty collaborative process at times, and getting buy-in from other people. And then a couple others that are on here. But I want to talk about, let's start with the principle of least privilege. Can you give the audience and myself a little bit of an idea of what we're trying to get at with that?
Well, yeah, we kind of touched on it earlier a little bit, but the least privilege is, the user should only have access to what they need to get their job done. And zero trust is another buzzword that a lot of organizations are starting to utilize as well. That's very similar to least privilege, but that's really what it comes down to, just making sure users only have access to what they need to get their jobs done or to meet the requirements of their job title.
So in terms of a regular cadence, I guess another two-part question here for you. Why is it important to have a regular cadence, and kind of what do you recommend in terms of what that cadence might look like? And I imagine some of that's driven by the asset we're talking about, but again, kind of why is it important, and do you have any suggestions in terms of what that cadence might look like?
Yeah, user access reviews, some people think, well, I did a user access review, I'm good. Unfortunately, it's something that you need to keep after, as we talked about, people change roles, maybe new features and functions of applications come out, new roles are established for applications. So there may be different assignments of permissions. There's all a long list of reasons why we need to make sure we continue to evaluate and monitor user access. But every application may be slightly different. But as a starting point, I would say every year, annually would be the minimum that I would recommend user access reviews be performed. If there's an application that is, maybe extremely important, that has a lot of confidential data and maybe many different roles and changing occurring quite often, or maybe the organization has had a lot of turnover and there's been a lot of people coming and going, you may want to do those user access reviews more often than annually.
What about when you bring a new asset on board? Is that something you would do would you ever do a user access review of some sort before you start rolling something out, or as you're rolling it out, or is it generally kind of after the fact? How do you typically see that when something new is being added?
Well, yeah, when you're adding a new application, it needs to be discussed who needs access, and that needs to ideally start when you're deploying or implementing a new application or a new system. Once you define who has access or who needs access to what, start your review right away and document it. These users have been documented to have this level of access. So then when you do your next review, you're going to just be able to, audit that, confirm that. If things have changed, identify, is that change correct? Do the people that are still in there still need access? Do they still have the same role they did when they were originally added? And make the changes needed to correct the access.
And then the last thing I'll ask on this slide, unless you have anything else you want to add to what they should be doing, I'm open to that, certainly. We talk about tracking and reporting on metrics. Are there any real good metrics or any type of specific reporting that you like to see an organization provide or create when they're doing this work?
Well, I did mention the documentation piece of it. So it has to be a repeatable process that is documented, and it can be reported on, should be reported on. So some of the things you should be reporting out, I mentioned we should do it annually. Any changes that are made should be identified and listed, especially if they're changes that are identified as part of the user access review. So if you identify, okay, this risk was identified, this user had elevated privileges and they shouldn't have, how long did they have it? Why did they have it? And was it corrected? Maybe other things could be trending. Maybe you've got a specific application that you're consistently finding elevated access of individuals that shouldn't have access to that one application. You maybe need to look at a change control process, a more controlled control process for who has access to that application. Or maybe whoever's administering that application is not following proper change control. So that's just another thing that is, a benefit for doing user access reviews as well. Yeah, that's some of the main things that I can think of, I guess.
So let's flip it around. So what they shouldn't be doing, and again, I encourage you to add anything you see fit, but obviously don't treat this as a check the box exercise. It's got to be more important than that. Don't leave it all to IT. It is kind of a collaborative process. Don't ignore dormant accounts or inactive users. Don't overcomplicate the process, and then don't ignore service or privileged accounts. So I guess maybe take any of these that you find most important. I think the one toward the bottom there is interesting, and maybe you can elaborate on what that means a little bit. But anything that stands out in terms of stuff you see bad habits in sometimes and having to be corrected, or anything you would add to this list?
Well, no, this is a good list of things that you shouldn't do. Not performing a user access review obviously is a big no-no.
It's probably the number one.
Yeah, you got to do them, and you got to do them right. You got to have a good program. It should be structured. It should get good buy-in from everybody. Documentation, again, if you're not documenting it, that's going to get you into trouble. Reporting, making sure you're correcting those items that you found. So this is a good list.
I actually missed two there at the bottom. That's my fault. But I guess before Tony and I jump into the module itself the wireframes of the module, I guess one final question I would ask, and again, a two-parter here. I apologize. I seem to be in the habit of doing that today. Where do you see the future of employee access review going? I mean, you've talked a little bit about moving to the cloud, a lot of this stuff becoming even more critical to keep an eye on, and presuming there will be more systems in place in the future as we get access to more things and are trying to provide more services and things like that. Where do you see this going? What do you see as critical? Anything you worry about going forward that could cause additional harm?
Well, I think from my perspective, and I've already started seeing it, is the more regulatory pressure to make sure you're doing them and doing them right, more oversight that comes from your audit team as well, external, internal auditing. So there's going to be more reasons that we need to do them and be required to do these reviews and do them right. There's lots of new tools coming out to help automate this process. You don't have to start from scratch and build something from scratch and try to do spreadsheets and that type of thing. You're going to show us TRAC. That's a good platform to start with. There's other tools out there that some of them are extremely expensive. But this isn't a new concept. This is something that's been out there for a while. I could share some other tools out there that I've seen. A lot of them take a lot of work to implement, especially if it's the first time. The first time is the most painful to build it out, to get the program in place, get all the applications or the assets added to the user reviews, and that baseline, who has access to what. That's going to be the most challenging and the most difficult, time-consuming process. Getting the buy-in and making sure you got that champion to keep it rolling is extremely important. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that I can really think of there.
So obviously, it seems like everything we talk about now has some sort of AI component or AI potential threats down the road. Is there anything, I guess, good, bad, or ugly that you think AI might be able to get involved when it comes to the employee access review piece of things?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some possibilities and opportunities there that it could potentially use AI to automate the process to some degree. And maybe it's just going to be getting an export or an extract out of the application and being able to upload that into a controlled AI engine that can break it down for you and quickly analyze it. There's a lot of possibilities there for sure.
Okay. Well, Terry, obviously you're going to stick around because we may have some questions that pop up, but I also want you to be here when we start walking through some of the TRAC piece of things to talk about some of the things you like about it. And obviously there are some areas where we'll continue to improve that module going forward. We're really looking forward to the launch of it. And Tony's going to talk about that in a minute, but we certainly think that it's definitely will continue to evolve just like this whole process continues to evolve. So with that said, Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I apologize I haven't gotten to you more recently here, but obviously this is a module that we've been working on for a little while. I'm going to encourage you to tell some of the history behind it, but maybe just start with why it's something we felt was important and kind of where we are in the process and when you expect to be able to start rolling this out.
Sounds great. So I think Terry did a really good job of explaining, why this is important. We did feel like as well, this is a logical module within TRAC. I think it flows nicely with the other tools that we provide within TRAC. And like Terry mentioned, one of the most challenging parts of building out a user access review process is getting the information into the tool, like building out the program. And customers of TRAC today have the ability to track their IT assets. They have their employees in there. So those are two of the big components as far as, getting that information loaded. And then from there, it's, obviously connecting the two. But we wanted to utilize what we have in TRAC to offer this and enable this tool to make this process more repeatable for our customers. So Terry's covered a lot of these points, but, these reviews aren't necessarily easy. So if our customers can utilize a tool like TRAC to plan and execute their access reviews, we wanted to enable that. So it just seemed like a logical next step with what we already have in TRAC. And we wanted to allow our customers to use one tool to manage, their IT assets. They've got their users, their employees in there. We wanted to pull that all together into one tool with their employee access reviews. So it was, for us, it was a logical kind of next step as far as enabling additional modules for our customers, both existing and new. And where we're at right now, we actually started development on employee access last fall, which seems like quite a while ago. But with the announcement with FFIEC CAT sunsetting, we kind of shifted our roadmap around a little bit and moved up NIST and CRI, as you mentioned earlier in the session. So we put employee access on pause just with changing in the market conditions. We wanted to prioritize and get those two solutions out there. So put a pause on employee access, and now we are actually wrapping up development on that. We picked that up again as soon as we finished up NIST and CRI. So we are in the kind of the final couple sprints of wrapping up employee access. We are looking for a couple early adopters. We've got some customers that we've talked to in the past that we'll be reaching out to, but if anyone today is interested in chatting with me about that, we are looking for a couple folks to go in a couple weeks early and just give us some feedback on what they're seeing in the module. That'll likely happen towards the end of this month. And then our full launch is planned late September. So we are getting really close to having this available for purchase within TRAC. I did see one question pop up. There won't be a free version of employee access. This is a paid module. And like I said, it'll really leverage IT You'll be able to pull in those assets from the IT module as well. So if you haven't already the IT module live within TRAC, this would be a great addition to that.
Yeah, and we'll be able to show some of that when we get into the wireframes,
Yeah.
actually, about how those two integrate. It's pretty cool.
And I will just add on to my earlier comments about the TRAC user group that everybody's invited to. We are going to focus on the employee access module. So you'll learn a lot more. You'll get into a lot more in-depth walkthroughs with Mariah and things like that on that user group. So if you are interested, that'd be a great place to learn a lot more information. Like Brett said, we'll show some wireframes today, but during the user group, that'll be September 17th. Everybody will have the opportunity to go in and take a look at that as well. And we'll have a panel of both internal and external consultants and folks like that, and then some external customers that'll be on that as well. So it'd be a great opportunity to learn there too.
Yeah, anecdotally, I mean, I remember must have been spring last year, Tony, you and I started talking to some of our heavy users of TRAC about, here's a list of modules we're looking at, and rank them in order of the ones that you think you'd be most interested in. And I remember thinking, boy, incident response is going to crush everything here. Or there were like one or two on there that felt like, oh, these are no-brainers. Employee access review was on there. And I just wasn't really thinking that would be that critical, but it wound up being kind of the far and away the winner of the one that most people thought would be valuable to them. So, it did take a little bit longer just because we were kind of trying to get to the market as quickly as possible to provide the NIST and CRI modules, but our team has done a fantastic job of picking the ball up and continuing to move forward with it, and really excited to launch that module. It wasn't that long ago when we weren't launching new TRAC modules quite as often as we are now. So very excited for this one and kind of what we've got going forward too. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know we're kind of in the real early stages of the single sign-on rollout. Was that something that really you see helping with the employee access module? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of leverage between single sign-on and employee access, and we'll only continue to build on that. We're very excited to have single sign-on available. We've been rolling that out kind of in groups because sometimes that takes a little collaboration with our customer success team. But there is a lot of, I'll use overlap, if for lack of a better word, between single sign-on and employee access, and we plan to continue to grow those capabilities as well, and those the tie-ins between the two.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned, I'm going to start pulling up my screen here. We can take a look at some of the wireframes we've been discussing, but I also think it's important to highlight that we, obviously the early integration here is going to be between IT and the employee access review module. But certainly it feels like there's a lot of opportunity to take the employee access module and integrate it with audit, for instance, where you can say, okay, these are the users, this is the access we purport to have, and who doesn't have it any longer, and that we turned it off, but we can actually pull it potentially into our audit module and allow you to audit. I assume that's something we've had conversations about, and maybe even other integrations I'm not thinking about.
Yeah, 100%. That, like you said, we started with IT. That's the logical one where we can really leverage the data that's in IT. But there are so many opportunities with the employee access module for us to just enable the data that's already in TRAC or the data that we use in some of these other modules to make that review process easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, I'm going to encourage both you and Terry, if you see anything in here as I'm going through this, the wireframes, jump in. I may have some questions as we're moving along. I will encourage everybody that's watching this to realize this is not a live functional module. We have a great UI UX person who is able to put these wireframes together so we can kind of get a look into the future a little bit. Can't guarantee this is exactly how it's going to look or function necessarily, but should give you a really good understanding and idea of what we're hoping to do with this module and how it's going to operate. So I thought I would start with just kind of the onboarding piece. Now, if you are not an IT risk user of TRAC, certainly we would encourage you to take a look at that, but that doesn't mean that employee access wouldn't work for you. Just because you don't have one doesn't mean the other one wouldn't operate. So in the employee management piece, the onboarding piece, if you do have the IT risk module, when you first get in here, you're going to be able to go to the asset management And it's going to give you a few different options here to get your systems basically in here to perform the reviews and to approve access and things like that. The first option would be to start from scratch, which is what you would do primarily if you don't have the IT risk module. But for those of you that do, we will have an option to synchronize your existing data, which simply means pulling the assets that you would have to perform those access reviews for directly into the employee access review module. So kind of a couple clicks of a button, you'll be able to pull all of those assets directly into your employee management review module, or employee access review module rather, and then start building that out. So that's really where that tie-in comes into play. We'll be able to say, here are the assets you've already got, who has access, what level of access, who's going to be responsible for approving things, denying things, taking people off, removing access, things like that. So again, don't have to have the IT risk module necessarily for employee access review to work, but there is a really nice piece of integration there that I think will help get you started pretty quickly. So onboarding, there's a variety of ways to do that. One thing I should highlight, and Tony, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, this module is not built to automatically, clicking they don't have access to a particular system is not going to go into that system and remove access. So it is important to know that this is more of a documentation, a review module, making sure that we are keeping, no pun intended, track of all of that. But it isn't going to go in and give people access in other systems or take access away. Is that fair?
That is correct. It's just meant to kind of manage your program. It doesn't necessarily go into those other applications and add or remove access.
Sure. So once you get your assets in here, though, you will have the ability to go inside of each of them and build out some different pieces of it. So the asset name, in this case, Adobe Acrobat, what type of asset it is, who the owner of the asset is. But then you also have an access manager. And that's going to be a critical part of this, because the access manager is going to be who's ultimately responsible for approving access or giving final approval of access to a particular user. So whomever you select as the access manager would be that final gateway before access is approved and given. So you'd be able to select that. There is the ability to provide tags and set scheduled review dates. So Terry, we go back to having a regular cadence. You want to be able to make sure that we're doing this on a more routine basis, and TRAC obviously can help with that, including sending out notifications. But then another thing that I think is really important is, obviously there are different permission levels depending upon the type of product or service or asset that we're talking about. We do default to kind of a basic level of permission and an administrative level of permission, but you will have the ability to add additional levels and describe what those levels mean and what type of access they have. So Terry, one thing, maybe I can ask you this. I think one of the things we had on the what you should do slides is have clear criteria about what level of access means what. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on why that's so important.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the person doing the user access review doesn't have a clear understanding of what each level of access is granting that user, obviously it could lead to elevated permissions to somebody that shouldn't have that elevated permission. So yeah, that's important to make sure you have your permission levels well defined and well understood.
So being able to do that right here in TRAC should be helpful. You also have the ability to toggle over to the employee tab, which would show all of the employees that currently have access, who their approver was, when the approval was last modified, essentially, and then what level of permission they do currently have access. And you can adjust it right from here as well. So being able to see the employees that currently have access, maybe used to have access, those sorts of things. And then we will have a request log tab as well that will provide the status of those requests. So what the request was, it was to enable access, what the asset name was, the employee, and then what the status of their request looks like and when it was last modified. So at the asset level, once it's here in the employee access review module, you'll be able to see all of that information, the details, including what the permission levels look like, the employees that have access or previously had access, and then the request log as well. Let's go and take a look at what it looks like when you are requesting from an employee perspective. So When they get in here, they would see the assets that currently are in your version of the asset management module. Access can be requested here on the right-hand side simply by clicking request rather, and then providing the type of request and enable access, for instance, and then what the justification for that request would be. So pretty simple to request access right here from in the TRAC module. And then what it looks like in terms of reviewing those requests would be kind of a bit of a process. So there are two ways to do this, basically. The first chain would be every single user can have a manager that would approve or deny their access first, and then it would go to the access manager of the asset itself. So it could conceivably be the user requests it, it goes to their supervisor, they approve it, it goes to the person that has the access control for the asset itself. They make the final approval, and then they get it taken care of in that particular application. The alternative would be you can kind of skip that middleman if you wanted and just go straight from the user to the access manager overall for the asset. So there are a couple of ways of doing that. Depends on how many kind of checks and balances you want to have included. But when the access manager comes in here, they'll have the opportunity to approve or deny. So this would be at the top level. So in this case, you'll see the request status down here at the bottom. Request was submitted. It was approved by that person's supervisor, Sophia Johnson in this case. And eventually it goes up to Matt Johnson. He's the access manager. He would be final say. Let's say he approves it. Matt says, yep, we're good to go. He clicks approve. That will highlight this mark as complete box. So again, it is important to remember, just because you approve it here in TRAC does not mean they actually get that access. That would still require the person, whomever is in control of that asset, would still have to go into the asset itself, apply those permissions, and then they can come back in and click mark as complete and close it. And now that will move to that completed section. So we'll be able to see, okay, the request type, the asset itself, the employee name, and whether or not they've gained access or were denied, and when the last modified date was. So again, there is a chain, and it can be either a two-step chain or a three-step, depends upon how many pieces, how many gates you want to put in there, basically. But the idea being, we want to make sure the right people get access. We want to make sure that we don't have privilege creep. We don't have people getting access to things they don't need to. So we do have those gateways. We do have those metrics. We do have those the way of reporting based off of it as well. Right now, we don't have the ability as part of the workflow or the wireframes here to show reporting. But for those of you who are familiar with TRAC, we obviously have all kinds of great reports, from super granular reports all the way up to the broadest ones you could use from a board perspective. So I am confident as we move forward, and probably in that September user group meeting, we'll be able to share more of those. But again, it's a fairly simple tool, but I mean that in the best way possible. It's built to really help you understand who has access to what, why they need access, what the status of their access looks like. And then we even have the ability for you to offboard users as well. So let's say one of your employees leaves for another position. We will have an offboarding option for you to come in, see the employee's name, their email, all that stuff, who they're managed by, who they manage, and then what assets are assigned. They have actually what assets they currently have access to, the permission level, and then if they are the administrator on any of those assets, that would show up here as well. So when you are offboarding, you'll get a pretty easy way to understand what this person's role was, what they have access to, and what they're currently doing from an approval perspective. And if you move through this workflow, the second step will be looking at the items, the assets that they are making approvals for. And you can actually easily say, okay, Aiden's leaving, we're moving the access manager role to Ava or whomever it might be. So again, as you're not waiting for the next review necessarily, if somebody does leave the institution or organization, you can very easily get them offboarded here in TRAC. Again, you'd still have to go in and turn their access off in these particular platforms, but managing it and understanding what they currently have access to and what needs to change should be pretty simple. And then if you continue forward, you can see the request type. We're going to disable the access for these pieces. we're going to change the access manager there, and then you'll be able to click through and confirm and things like that. So like most of our modules, it's going to be kind of a start to finish solution, from getting your assets in here and understanding which ones might have access controls we have to review, to requesting access, to approving access, all the way through the offboarding process. All of that is built into TRAC as part of this module. And certainly the reporting capabilities will be pretty robust as well going forward. Yeah, Terry, jump in, please.
On that offboarding, just a question, and I don't know if anybody else was thinking about this, but as you're showing this, on the offboarding, is there a check process that shows you've removed access for each of those applications as that user is leaving?
Yep. So unfortunately, I don't know that I have the ability to click through to any of them in the wireframes, but it will be this action. You'll be able to go in, and it'll be very similar to what we saw when you were getting approved. You'll have that mark complete option, and it would just be a matter of saying, okay, we've marked this item as complete, and then the status would change from awaiting submission to completed. So yes, great question. That is something we want to make sure we're keeping an eye on as well, and being able to report on, certainly. Thank you for asking it, Terry. Thanks for jumping in.
Yep.
So Tony, I may turn it back to you just for a minute. I know I'm really excited about this module. I think it was a very logical next step, certainly once we got the frameworks out of the way, but probably even before then. So that certainly it'll be great to have it available. But anything I missed in kind of walking us through things that you want to highlight, or anything before we check and see if there were any questions?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job covering it. We're excited to have it available and get customers in there, utilizing it. Again, like, some of the things we've launched recently, this is, our launch of the module, and we'll continue to build on that and add features and functionality as we move forward. So if you have an opportunity to get in there and take a look, if you're interested in utilizing it, we would welcome feedback and suggestions, as always with all of our modules. So we're really excited to be wrapping it up and having it available in the next month and a half for customers to utilize, to really help them move their user access reviews forward.
Terry, anything that you want to recap on either the conversation we had up at the top, or anything in the module itself, or what you think this module, or how it might be helpful to certainly your clients that you work with, or even the ones that might use it on their own?
Well, I'm excited for it. I think this is something that a lot of my clients would benefit from dramatically, from the manual methods that we've developed over the years. I think this is going to be a huge benefit, and a more efficient, better way of doing it going forward.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to check and see if there was anything in the chat here that came in.
I think the only one.
Tony, it looks like
I think the only one we haven't answered is just the recording and the slides, and then a new one.
What about the ability to build profiles for specific user roles that will encompass all assets needed for within the role? What do you think of that one, Tony?
That is a future request that we have. So I do see that as something that we'll probably be adding shortly after launch. That is something that we have talked about.
Yeah. One thing I think is really cool about what we've done recently is just how nimble we've become as a company. I think with TRAC, the first handful of years I was here and demoing it, we weren't quite as nimble. I'm going to zip through this. Sorry, I don't want to make anybody seasick, but I do want to get to our contact information if anybody needs that. But I do think the ability for us, we've certainly updated our modules much more frequently, come up with new modules much more frequently. I know that's something that you cover on the roadmap portion of the user groups, certainly, but I anticipate this being the starting point of a good module, and just continuing to grow going forward. So very excited about the future of this module and the future of TRAC in general. So first of all, as I wrap up, I guess I should say, anybody that does want the slides and the recording, there is a question in the survey about that. You also can reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to send those along. Really appreciate it. Tony, Terry, you guys are awesome as usual. Really appreciate your help. I think this was great information. If anybody has any questions for any of us, our contact information's on here. I'll keep it up for a few minutes. Feel free to reach out directly. Otherwise, if you don't mind taking that survey, we really appreciate that. And really looking forward to this and the next one next month. So Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Terry. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.